Hello, my name is Laura Burke, and I'm delighted to be here today to talk about how we can support young people who are feeling suicidal. This is for parents who are not sure where to go and need support of having that conversation with their young person and knowing what to do next. I've been in the mental health industry for over 10 years. I've worked a lot with CAMS and I've been a mental health lead in a school. So I'm delighted to bring my experience of this to you. And I've also been suicidal as a young person myself. So I have lots of different experience that I can share with you along the way. This isn't a live session. I am recording this for you. So please just know if at any point you need to take a break, you need to step away, that is absolutely fine. I want you to take care of you. It's very essential. So pause me, but come back to me. Just take a breath, take a breather, and give yourself what you need before coming back to this session. That is absolutely okay. What we're going to cover in today's session, we're going to look at the prevalence and the impact of suicide on individuals and families. We will recognise key warning signs and the risk factors associated with children and young people. I will teach you the plan approach that I've created to respond safely to young people. And we are going to look at a variety of resources that can support young people. And of course, we are going to look at self-care because you can't keep pouring from an empty cup. It's really difficult to do it all when you are feeling really, really impacted yourself. So please note that we will cover looking after you too. So why we need to talk about suicide in the first place? Well, suicide is the leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 34 in the UK, the leading cause. In 2023, over 1,840 young people under the age of 35 did take their own lives in the UK. It's a number that's far too high. Around three-quarters of these individuals were boys or young men. And on average, around 5 young people do take their lives every day. Research does show, though, that with appropriate early intervention and support, suicide by young people can be prevented. There is a lot that can be done and a lot more we can do as a community, as a society. But just to introduce today, let's have a look at some myths versus causes. So asking a young person about suicide may introduce them to the idea. This is a myth. You cannot put the idea of suicide into someone's head. They are either feeling that way or they are not feeling that way. Okay, it isn't something you can just inject in their mind and they suddenly think, oh, I haven't thought about that, but now you said it, I'm going to go and do that. It really, really doesn't work like that. Equally, that's why we can't, in just one conversation, take it all away. We want to, especially as parents, we want to take it all away and look after our children, but it can take time. Next question or statement. Young people threatening suicide are seeking attention. This comes up quite often. People think that they're just doing it to get a reaction, but this is a myth. Young people a lot of the time are saying multiple amount of things to do to get attention. Not a lot of young people are saying this as a way to get attention. So we always treat every single young person telling us this as fact. Most youth suicides happen without warning. That is a myth. There are usually warning signs. Whether they are presented to you is a different story, or perhaps they were presented to someone who didn't have the education. Either way, there are warning signs, but sometimes they are so minute they are hard to pick up on. Why might a young person feel suicidal? What might make a young person feel suicidal? Have a think about that for a minute. Do we think it might be? There are lots of pressures, there's lots going on, there's relationships, there's friendships, there's school, there's home life, there's the future. It can all feel very overwhelming for a young person, can't it? But in particular, let's look today at some of the risk factors. We've got peer pressure. This is a massive, massive part of being a young person, that the peer pressure that they might experience. And it might be so detrimental or so big that a young person may have experienced low self-esteem, lacking confidence, and all with this that can lead to them feeling that they can't go in anymore. There could also be social media pressures, relationship problems they experience, mental health issues, if they've been abused or neglected, if they are self-harming. That is a massive risk factor of suicide taking place. It doesn't mean that if someone is self-harming, they are automatically suicidal, but understandably, if somebody is harming themselves, this does increase the risk of suicide because the risk that's already been presented to us. There's substance misuse. If a young person is taking lots of drugs or drinking lots of alcohol, this does increase the risk of suicide because it's not safe. Their inhibitions go. Bullying. If an individual is living in an environment or being bullied consistently or is in a space where they aren't respected or taken care of, this can make individuals feel that there's no place else to go. A lot of young people are highly isolated. We think about the elderly generation and we think that they're highly isolated, but young people are too. And a lot of the time, people are crying out for connection. They're not feeling understood. They don't feel like anyone will get them. And if this continues and continues and they're withdrawing themselves, this could lead to somebody ending their life. If an individual has access to means, so if they have access to medication, sharp objects, anything like that, that could mean that the young person is more likely to end their life if they are feeling that way. And of course, trauma. If a young person has experienced trauma in their lifetime, that for anybody, that is a massively negative situation that they've experienced. And if it isn't dealt with correctly, or they're not supported, or they haven't been able to work through it and it stays with them, it can mean that things can happen and they can continue to feel in this space. And that might make them think that they need to end their life. So we've got lots of different risk factors there. The impact of social media. I thought I'd bring this up because this is something that we think about a lot when it comes to our young people, and thinking has social media been a really negative influence. And I would agree that yes, it has been a highly negative influence, but there are some positives as well. So let's look at the positives firstly. So it can be a place where people can feel supported, they can feel connected, they are able to express themselves in a way that they may not have been able to before. And this brings them a sense of belonging because they found their people. You know, there's a Facebook group for everything, there's Instagrams, there's hashtags. People can connect with people that understand them. What it also does is it gives you access to information and help out there. So if you are experiencing a mental health issue, it can mean that a young person can get support. It raises awareness about the issues that they care about. If they are interested in climate change, for instance, they can find individuals or services that are in that same wavelength as well. And it can be a space for learning opportunity. But unfortunately, there are lots of negatives when it comes to social media too. The comparison aspect. When an individual does compare themselves to somebody else, what happens is they always come out negative. They are always coming out as less than. You never look at someone and go, oh, I've got it going on. I've got it all together. You know, I've got the nice things at home. You always look at someone else and go, they've got more money than me. They're prettier than me. They look better than me, whatever it might be. And young people are very highly influenced when they are looking outward, when they are looking at other people, and they do take it to heart when they don't feel good enough. Of course they do. Cyberbullying and harassment is a real problem. You know, we used to deal with bullying in school and they came home and they were safe. But unfortunately, with social media, with having access to somebody all the time, this means the bullying can continue out of hours. Sleep and concentration problems. They are, you know, looking at social media all the time. They're not sleeping properly. This can have a massive impact to their mental health. Also, exposure to harmful content. There are lots of eating disorder websites as a way to encourage a young person to lose weight, as a way to glamorize having an eating disorder. There are suicide chat rooms, suicide websites that encourage an individual to end their life. There are self-harm images online. So there is a lot of harmful content out there. So we need to ask our young people what they are doing online. Just how we would ask them, how's your day? How was school? How was it at your friend's house? How is it online? What are you getting up to? Just a general conversation. It can also lead to an addiction. There are lots of young people that are actually addicted to social media or technology in general. And, you know, when you try and take it away, there's a real outburst of emotions because they have become dependent on this device, for instance. So there are positives and negatives of social media, but I think the main message that I want to get across here is we need to be mindful what the young people are doing on these social media sites and you know what they are watching. And yes, they might be scrolling through TikTok, but you don't know what is coming up. So we just need to be mindful and just open that communication with your young person. Something I wanted to highlight, which I did see a lot with my time in CAMS, was something called suicide contagion. Okay, and young people are more vulnerable to this. And what this is where an individual is exposed to suicide. So they hear about someone else that has died by suicide, and this can lead to some individuals, especially the vulnerable ones, to imitate that behavior. They feel that, they are in this same light, they are in the same headspace as this individual, and at times when they hear that someone else has ended their life, it makes them feel I should go and do it, or it may encourage this behavior. So the person who acts as the model, the individual that has died by suicide, they might be a celebrity, a friend, a family member, or someone known in the community. In my experience, when a young person had ended their life to suicide, we then had to watch our young people even further because the risk really heightened and we saw a real escalation of challenging behaviour. So just keep that in mind. If we do hear of things like that, just keep an eye on the young people. And why are young people at a greater risk of this? So I have said that they are more vulnerable, and they are more vulnerable, they are at a greater risk. And the reason is, firstly, they're a greater influence from their medium peers. They are more likely to be influenced by the more so than older people, to be influenced by what they see, what they hear, or what they read in the media. Young people may not actually grasp how permanent suicide is. They may not have really thought this through, that, once they died, they have died. Their emotional responses may be more intense, they may act more spontaneously, and this is without full consideration of the consequences. So they are much more likely to be risk takers, and during their brain development, they aren't really thinking too much about the end result. They're in the moment. Okay, they want to satisfy a need or they want to take something away, and that is what they're thinking about. If an individual has already been affected by suicide, the risk of them taking their life is higher. Okay, and many young people are already dealing with lots of challenges like mental health difficulties, they're self-harming, or they're generally emotionally distressed, which in turn does increase their vulnerability to contagion. So that is just something for you to be mindful of, and to keep an eye on your young people if this does occur or we do know of anybody. But what are the warning signs of suicide? What might make us think that a young person is thinking about taking their own life or is having thoughts of suicide? Let's take a look together. So they could be feeling hopeless or worthless. And how that sounds is nothing's going to get better. I'm never going to get what I need. I'm never going to have a family. I'm never going to be successful. I'm never going to get a job. Very bleak, negative way of thinking about themselves, or thinking they're not good enough. This could also be a deep depression and sadness. We could really see a huge dip in their mental health, and they just don't seem their usual behaviour anymore. And they could lose interest in daily life. They're not bothered about playing football anymore if they loved football, or going out with their friends, or they used to go dancing and they're not bothered. Or you're saying to them, why don't you go out to the cinema with your friends? Here's some money. And they're going, nah, can't be bothered. Young people want to be out. They want to be with their friends typically. They want to, be away from parents, to be honest, don't they? They're all about their friendships and, doing things that make them happy. So that is a cause for concern. If they're struggling to sleep, if they're struggling to eat, they're good indicators. When we're not feeling great, our behaviour does show up differently. We aren't able to sleep appropriately, or we aren't eating because we can't be bothered, or we don't have the appetite. Changing personality generally, this is the major one. If we are thinking about a young person and how they are generally, and then all of a sudden we've seen a real change in their presentation, that is a real key understanding of something's up, something's going on here. If they start withdrawing from people or social media, if they start saying goodbye, if they start giving their belongings away, all big warning signs. Typically young people like their belongings, they hold on to things, they, have certain things that are important to them. Say, for instance, they had an iPad they loved and they gave that away to their best friend. Why would you give that away? What are you going to use? Self-harming, of course, as I said, it can increase the risk. It does not mean that because they are self-harming, they are suicidal. we need to ask, but it does increase the risk. Usually, individuals are self-harming to cope with their distressed feelings as a way to self-manage, or it could be a way to punish themselves. But it is important to know it could raise the risk of suicide. If they're talking or thinking about death, there's no bigger warning sign than that. If you've got an individual right in front of you that's telling you, I don't want to be here anymore. I can't go on. We need to listen. We need to listen to our young people. If we're noticing a decline in their school or work performance, our behaviour gives clues. If they feel angry and that things can't change. And the biggest warning sign that I wanted to tell you about, and one that we typically see before an individual does try and take their own life, is sudden unexplained recovery. This is where a young person has followed a certain path, and then all of a sudden we see a change in their behaviour. So perhaps they've been really withdrawn. They've always been in their bedroom, they're never coming out, they are very reluctant to communicate with you, they are taking their food upstairs. There's a real level of withdrawing from the family unit. You're trying to get them downstairs to talk to you, and they're not having any of it. But then all of a sudden, they're saying to you, they're coming downstairs, hi mum, let's go do this, or let's go do that, or hi dad, or whoever whoever that relationship is, let's go food shopping, let's do this, let's do that. And they're spending lots of time with you. That's a cause for concern, because that's a real change in their behaviour. And what we know about behaviour does not change overnight. It doesn't change rapidly. It takes time to change behaviour. And if that individual has been quite low, quite withdrawn, it takes time to open up again. It takes time to be in relationships again and be out there. So what that's telling us is that individual has made a plan to end their life. And that young person has decided enough's enough. I am going to end my life, and I'm going to be out of pain. And because they think they're going to be out of pain, they feel relieved. They feel relieved that it's finally going to be over, that they are moving away from their feelings, and that they will have relief. There will be an end. So with that comes elation, comes hyperness, comes excitement, because all of this rubbish that they've been dealing with is going to end. All of these thoughts that have been telling them to end their life, it's all going to stop. So sudden unexplained recovery is a real warning sign that we do need to make sure that we understand sudden unexplained recovery. But there are barriers, aren't there, for young people when talking about suicide? And if I think about my own experience, I wouldn't have just gone up to someone and said, I'm feeling suicidal. It would never have come up in a conversation. The only reason it did is because someone was brave enough to ask me. And I remember thinking, is this a me problem? Is this something that I'm just experiencing? So a lot of confusion, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration. I didn't understand why this was happening, why I was feeling this way, but my brain was constantly telling me, you need to end your life, you need to do this, you need to do that. And it's exhausting. And if you speak to lots of individuals who are feeling suicidal, lots of them will say they just wanted their brain to be quiet. And unfortunately, lots of individuals do not know that there is a way that we can take the pain away. It doesn't have to be suicide. It just needs to be that we retrain the brain, we give the brain something different. And then before you know it, these thoughts will be well managed. So the barriers for young people when talking about suicide, I'm sure you've thought of them already. Fear, shame, embarrassment, relief, confusion, hopelessness. It's never going to change. There's no point in me talking about this. Or hopeful, the fact I was able to speak to you and you listened. You didn't talk over me. You didn't jump into action. You didn't, try and find a solution. You didn't start panicking. Made that individual feel that, wow, maybe things can change here. And that's what we want to do. As parents, that's what we want to give young people, that space to be able to communicate. But something I wanted to highlight is around language. If we are saying to a young person, it's silly, it's no big deal, that's really just putting the young person back in a box. That's putting your young person and saying, go over there, be quiet. What we need to be saying is, I can hear you're finding things hard right now. I can hear this is difficult for you. This is a lot for you to manage. This is a lot for one person to go through. We don't say commit suicide anymore. That was related to when suicide was a crime. That's changed in 1961. Suicide is no longer a crime in the UK, hence why we wouldn't say commit suicide. We would say that someone took their own life or they ended their life, just as a way for us to be mindful. Unsuccessful attempt, we don't say that because actually unsuccessful does not sound nice. There was an attempt of suicide or a suicide attempt. We wouldn't refer to someone as a suicidal person. They are a person that's experiencing suicidal thoughts or behaviour. And equally completed suicide, we just say suicide. And what we don't do is when we see behaviour, sometimes that we wrap up behaviour and we start talking about it in quite an unproductive way, saying that someone's being manipulative or crying out for attention. Say what the behaviour is. You know, this individual has been emotionally upset. This is what they've done next. Just because someone is, trying to seek help, it doesn't mean they're crying out for attention. When we say that someone's crying out for attention, there's a judgment there. Young people don't need to be judged. They need care. They need you. They need you to listen. They need you to understand. And perhaps you don't understand. And in a way, how lucky are you that you don't understand what that feels like? But equally, we need to understand what our young person is saying and we need to understand what they need. That's the real important bit here. What does my young person need from me? And you can ask them. So, how do I support a young person who is feeling suicidal? What do I do if I'm worried about my child? My child's been really quiet and I don't know why. And actually, I think there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. We need to ask them. And I'm going to go through this in a bit more detail so you really understand what we can do and what we don't do. But what we don't do is we don't talk over them. What we don't do is act shocked and alarmed and horrified because that's going to stop them talking. What we don't do is dismiss them. Definitely not. Or say things like, well, if you've got to be worried about, you don't pay bills. Or all you've got to worry about is going out with friends. It's a lot more than that. Young people have a lot of stresses, a lot of emotional distress that we may or may not know about. So it's about being compassionate and leading with empathy. So this is where we talk about the plan approach. This is how we support a young person who's feeling suicidal. We will plan our approach. We will listen non-judgmentally. We will ask about suicide and we will act. So let me break this down for you. So firstly, you have been worried about your young person. You've been listening to this training today and you think, hold on a minute, there's a lot more that meets the eye here. I'm a bit concerned about my young person. I need to ask the question because I need to know where they're at. If they're not, they're not. Fantastic. But if they are, you need to know about it because we need to draw this out so we can support. If you don't know about it, you can't do anything about it. We need to have these conversations. So, firstly, what we do in the planning our approach is we need to research services in advance that can support the young person. So, we've got the variety of helplines, online communities, mental health services. I have put some at the end of this presentation as well for you. You want to find the right time and place to have this discussion. You're not going to do this in a family setting with lots of other people. You are going to do this when it's one on one. I've usually found that with a young person, it's much better to have this conversation when you're not directly staring at them. I found that when you're directly staring at them, it can make them feel quite uncomfortable. I found that if we're colouring with them or doing an activity or going for a walk or going on a drive where you're not looking at them, a lot more seems to come out. Okay, and I know that many other parents have shared this. Ensure it is a time you'll not be disturbed. Okay, if I was having a conversation with a young person right now, I need to make sure that not one person comes through that door because as soon as one person does, that stops the conversation. And we want the conversation to flow. So we need to ensure it's a time where both of you have got time and you're not going to be disturbed. So you might say, how are you? You don't seem like yourself lately. Is everything okay? I've noticed you don't seem like you. How are things? Or I've been a bit concerned about you recently. How are you doing? Or how has school been recently? Ask open-ended questions so you get a different result because what you're typically going to ask is how are you? They will say I'm fine. And then I would say, no, how are you really? Okay, don't be afraid to ask twice. Don't be afraid to ask different questions. You love them, they're yours. You want to take care of and protect them. Even when they're 55, you still want to protect them as a parent. And that's the the brilliance of being a parent, you will be there, you know, and they've got you. There's that loyalty. So we've planned our approach. We've started to think about what phrases we would ask in the conversation and to open the conversation. And this is our time once we've asked some phrases that I've just shared there, we allow them to talk. We don't interrupt. As parents, especially parents that are quite anxious themselves, they're typically very focused on, oh, okay, hold on, I'll do this for you, or I'll take this away, because we want to take their pain away. Of course we do. But allow them to talk without interruption. Focus on understanding rather than responding. Don't focus on what you've got to say next. Focus on what they are saying next. Show empathy and validate their feelings. That sounds tough. Wow, I'm sorry you're going through that right now. Nod and use verbal cues. I see. Go on. They'll be really surprised because if this is you dialing down, they're going to be really surprised that they're really given the floor here. It's going to take them by surprise a little bit, but that's a good thing. You can say things like, I'm glad you told me. Is there anything that's making you feel this way? I'm sorry you've been feeling this way. So there's just some example phrases that you can see there that can support you to support your young person. So this stage is really allowing them to open up, to hear what they've got to say. They may say things like they're having a really difficult time in class. There's one particular girl who's not being that pleasant to them. Someone's now created an Instagram about this individual and they're all hating on me and rating me and saying I'm ugly or whatever it might be, and that's making them feel isolated and alone and scared, and it's impacted their self-esteem. I'm sorry to you, you're going through that. It sounds really tough. What else has been going on? Find out more. Okay, find out more and then we can know what we can do. But actually, while we've been speaking to the young person, we've noticed they are showing some signs of warning. They are showing warning signs of suicide because they are seeming hopeless. They are telling you they can't do this anymore. That's when we need to ask about suicide. If we ever get that gut feeling that something isn't right, or we're quite scared or we're anxious, ask the question because it's either a yes or a no, and we need to know which one. So you need to be very clear and very direct when it comes to asking about suicide. And some of you on the call right now might be listening and you might be thinking, Laura, this is a bit much. I can't just be asking about suicide. Yes, you can, 'cause you need to know where they're at. Just like if your young person was on the floor, they've just passed out, and you've just got to them and they're awake now, you're going to say to them, have you eaten today? Have you taken anything? Um, have you missed your shot if they're a diabetic or whatever it might be? Okay. You are not going to be saying things like, oh, you know, the things that you put in your mouth 3 times a day, did you take them? And you know, there's loads of them, but you know, something you put in your stomach that makes you feel full. Did you take that? You're going to be like, have you eaten? Have you taken medication? As simple as that. Equally, mental health is no different. Have you been thinking about ending your life? Do you have thoughts of suicide? It doesn't matter how you say it, it just needs to be clear and direct. What you should not say is, are you having difficult thoughts? Because difficult thoughts, for me, is putting the washing on. Okay? Difficult thoughts for you might be ironing. Who knows? But we all have a different element of difficult thoughts. It's not clear enough. Have you got thoughts of suicide? Have you been thinking about ending your life? Doesn't matter what you say, you've just got to say it. And yes, you're going to feel unconfident, and yes, you're going to be scared to hear the answer, but it's much better to hear the answer and to keep them safe. When they have answered and they have said, yes, they do have thoughts of suicide, we then need to ask, have you made plans to end your life? The reason why we're asking that question is I need to see where they are and where they are in terms of risk. If you've got an individual who's telling you they've got thoughts of suicide, they haven't made a plan, and they can keep themselves safe, that is an individual that is far less riskier than someone who's saying, I have got thoughts of suicide and I plan to end my life, and that plan is this. Because if you're with your young person now and they tell you that their plan involves a vehicle on the way to school and they've got to go to school in a minute, you can't guarantee that you are going to see them when they get home. Okay? Or they're going to be there when you get home. So that is why there's a level of urgency when there's a plan. So when they have told you this, I'm glad you've told me. And I know this is difficult because you're going to be, feeling so incredibly anxious and panicked. and just stay calm. It's really important to stay calm because if you stay calm, it catches and they need to know that they can rely on you. So I'm glad you told me. Have you ever felt like this before? They may say to you, yes, this I've been feeling this for quite a while, or yes, I did feel like this 6 months ago. And then they might tell you something like 6 months ago, I did try to take my life. Okay. All of this stuff is highly relevant. Highly, highly relevant because all this information we need to pass on to professionals. Never, ever, ever keep this to yourself. This needs to be shared. The more people it can be shared with, the better, because then lots of people can have eyes on the individual to keep them safe. Okay. So if your young person has told you this, I'd be informing the school, I'd be informing the mental health team. If they don't live with their other parent, I'll be telling the other parent. It needs information like this needs to be shared to make sure that individual is safe. Okay. Bear with me. So that's asking about suicide. We are going to come to ACT in a moment. But what if they don't talk? Okay. What if you've asked a question and they don't speak to you and they keep quiet? What do I do then? Well, in my experience, that's one or two things. They either don't want to talk to you or they just feel really nervous right now. However, what your hope is the fact that they're still sitting there. So actually, there is an element of them wanting to stay in the space with you. If a young person gets up and walk out, they wanted to go. It was too much. But we do need to have this conversation. So it could be that you write a letter to your young person and you tell them you've got concerns and that you'd like to talk to them. And you can say to them they can text you if they'd like. If that feels easier, you can have a text conversation. You know, they can be in a different room to you, but you can text or the same room. The same room. Because sometimes it can be a lot easier to put things on text rather than say it out loud, and that's okay. So we don't have to communicate like this. Let's text. Or you can write me a letter. Okay? Or is there anything else that make them feel comfortable? So it's all about making the young person feel comfortable to have this conversation, but it is scary, of course it is. And say to them, look, this is hard to talk about, I understand, but I do have to ask you some of these questions to make sure you're safe. And as your parent, I need to make sure that you are well, that you are safe, and whatever it is, we will get through it together. Reassure them you're there for them. We'll get through this together. I've got you. Okay. Now we need to act based on the information they've told us. So if they have made a plan to end their life, ask about the plan. How, when. So, I'm not going to go into detail about methods and things like that 'cause I don't think it's relevant. But, if they told you the method of how they're going to, you need to know every bit of this because actually what you recognize is, oh gosh, they've got that method in their bedroom. That's really risky, really risky. So we don't leave them alone. If they are in immediate danger, so they are saying to you right now they're going to go take them or they have already taken them, call 999 or accompany them to A&E, depending on severity. You could call 111 and ask for some advice. They have a mental health helpline there too, so you can ask for some input. So say if it's a young person who told you about how they're going to end their life on their way to school, you can call that number and you can get some guidance. You alert a trusted family member or contact a mental health team if they have one. As I said, this needs to be shared. It's all hands on deck, really, when it comes to this, and it's not about keeping it to ourselves anymore. Some people will ask me, let's think about the questions people ask me in a live session about making a plan. What do you say to the young person? So I say to the young person, I'm really glad that we spoke today and thank you for talking to me about this. I know this was difficult for you. Based on what you've told me, I need to make sure that we get the right support for you. And what we need to do is we need to go to A&E so you can get a mental health assessment. So we're going to meet with someone and give you a mental health assessment who will then advise where we should go from there. Okay. They may like, I don't want to do this. I'm scared. It's understandable. Or maybe they go, I'm not going to go. So look, it's understandable to be anxious. I then do stuff like, right, let's charge your phone, let's download a film because you might be waiting a while depending on what's happened. Obviously, there's more immediate threat to life. That does change. It really does depend on the circumstance, but I do things like that to keep them comfortable, and then talk about things that will make them feel okay. But if they have told you that they have got thoughts to end their life, but they've not made a plan, well, then my next question is, can you keep yourself safe? Okay. And if they tell me they can, then that's what I go on. Okay. Of course, I'm going to check in. Of course, I'm going to follow up. Of course, I'm going to make sure that I'm there for them and we do things to look after one another. But equally, I take what they told me. This is when you say, what do you need from me? Or how can I help you? Or what do you need from someone else? A lot of the time, young people say when it comes to suicidal thinking, as I said to you before, is that they just want their brain to stop. They're sick and tired of feeling this way, and their thoughts are constant. So, your question could be, should we look at ways to distract you from your thoughts? If you look at the Mind website, there's lots of ways to distract yourself from suicidal thoughts. There's lots of things, but make a plan with them. What could they do to distract themselves? So when they do get a thought like that, I used to say to the young people a lot of the time, just go and sit with your parents. Go and sit with one of them. You don't have to say a word, just go and sit near them. And that's their parents' indicator to go, should we watch a film? Or, oh, you know what I was doing today? And engage in conversation or something they like, or you go and do something together. That's a really nice way to do it because it's the unspoken stuff. The young person may not feel that they can say, I don't feel safe, I don't feel great. But by them coming and sitting right beside you, you're aware if they come up close to you and tag on your sleeve or something like that. You could organise that with one another, but something that tells you and tells them that, okay, this is a time we need to put something in place right now. Connect the young person into services. There are services out there, there are helplines, there's people that they can talk to. So do utilise that and say to them, look, how about if I call them and I talk to them first about what we spoke about and then I pass the phone over? How does that sound? Or I put the phone on loudspeaker and I just talk from my perspective about what the situation is. How does that sound? And you can always create a safety plan with them. So this is a plan, as it says, to keep them safe. So there are loads online, but this is just one I've wrote here. If you write a safety plan example on Google, lots will come up. But something like, what will I do to help calm and soothe myself? Focus on my breathing, listen to my feel good playlist. What will I tell myself? I've got through this before, I can get through this again. These are thoughts. I do not need to act on them. Who can they call? Where's a safe place they can go? What if they still feel suicidal and out of control? So it's just a plan of action for them so that them thoughts don't turn into behavior and the thought patterns don't turn into a plan. Okay. So that is why this can be really helpful because it gives them control and they don't feel like they've got any control right now. And that can be really helpful. So safety planning is a treat, but share it once again. Lots of people need to have this, school, people at home, people that they trust. If they go to an after school club or anything like that, the organisation should have this as well. Just because if they do notice distress in a young person, they can say, should we have a look at that plan? Or just a little reminder. But obviously, I would ask the young person who you would share it with. So hopefully from what I've talked about, that has been quite clear in what we would do. Essentially, we need to plan our approach. We need to listen. That's the major one. We need to ask the question about suicide. I couldn't underline that even more. And then we need to act. In my experience, when someone asked me about suicide, I was absolutely relieved that someone felt confident enough to do that. And I don't remember what the conversation was. I have no idea what they asked me. I was very anxious, but I just remember how they made me feel. They made me feel validated. They didn't make me feel silly when I felt really silly. And they just gave me a space to explore it and help me understand I wasn't alone. And that made me feel hopeful. And that's what we want to do. Okay. We want to tell our young people that, like, look, I've got you. So the mental health services for 11 to 18-year-olds. So as I said to you before, we can recommend a variety of these services. And, it could be you're with your young person. You think, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go from here. Why don't we reach out to one of these services? These are trained counsellors, professionals, people that have worked in mental health for many, many years, and they will have lots of resources and support in this area. So it doesn't have to be that you're all on your own, because perhaps you feel very overwhelmed and very, unsure of what to do next. That's okay. You're human and you want the best for your young person. So it can be that when the conversation is happening, in your mind, you're thinking, I'm going to ensure that we speak to someone else about this. And be honest with your young person. You know, it's hard for me to hear this. Of course it is, but I need to hear this stuff, because maybe they're telling you they don't want to talk to you about it, and say, look, I'm here for you. I'm just here to listen. I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to give you solutions. And a lot of the time, that's what young people need, because they've been put in a box a lot of the time, or told to be quiet, or to get over it. And actually, there's a lot more going on for young people than we might think. There might be some cultural influences and barriers. It is important to note, it's important to recognise that culture and faith can have a strong influence on how families do think and talk about mental health and suicide. So, in some communities, suicide is seen as a taboo subject, or it might be the belief that emotional distress is linked to weakness, guilt, or shame. So, this understandably makes it harder for young people and parents to open up or ask for help. But as parents, I would say that our role is to create a space where it's safe to talk. That means being curious. What are you doing online then? Or what happened at school? Listening, and above all, respecting our child's beliefs, even if they're different from our own. When we do focus on safety and compassion, we can still protect our children's well-being while honouring our values that are important to our family. Would we agree with that? Yeah, it is important that we focus on the young people and their safety. And then, of course, I did say to you that we are going to think about you. Do not underestimate the impact that conversation about suicide can have on you, especially if it's your child. That is going to have a real, real knock on your mental health and how you feel. And it's going to make you doubt yourself and think, what have you done wrong? And you haven't done anything wrong. They are just a product of their environment. They've soaked up all of the situations that have occurred, their mindset, their belief systems, and unfortunately, it's led to them feeling suicidal. But, that doesn't mean they will always feel this. This is something right now. It doesn't mean it's their whole story. This can be a chapter in their life. It's not the whole book. So just be mindful of that. This is a time where intervention is needed to get them through this difficult period, just like we all do. We all need intervention. We all need support at some stage. So it's just relevant that we don't make them feel silly for it. But do make sure that you focus on you, and you make sure that you look after yourself and put in activities that reduce your stress. So if you're going to be worried about your young person, but that doesn't mean you do not focus on you at all. You need to put some fuel in the tank. So exercise, meditate, talk to someone, listen to music, do what you've got to do so you feel better. Because when you are in a logical headspace, you can help your child a lot better. If you are feeling so impacted by this experience, then it's going to be very difficult for you to listen non-judgmentally, to give them that space, to not jump to conclusions or provide solutions straight away. So do open up, or do make sure you do something for you that does make you feel calm and makes you feel you've got that energy, because you can't keep pouring from an empty cup. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that you got a lot from today's training. We do deliver training all over and to lots of different organisations. If you want to scan the QR code there, you can give feedback. Just write parents suicidal video, or actually any, you can write parents video YouTube or something like that, or whatever. I'll pick it up. So if you want to give any feedback or add anything, you can there. These are all the places we are on our socials and things like that, so you can jump on there, no problem. And I wish you all the best. I hope that your young person is thriving very, very soon and is given their space that they need. And just please note that this is a chapter, not the whole book, like I've said, and they can be supported and things can and will change. It just takes time. Okay. Thank you very much for listening to me. I've really enjoyed today. I hope you have too, and I hope you've got a lot from it. But that's all from me. Thank you so much. Bye.